Hi everyone. Today I thought about discussing with you about a topic that has been coming up again and again on my Instagram account on INFJinxed, and namely the connection between cognitive functions and behavior. A lot of people ask me questions along the lines of if I like to, I don't know, go to the same restaurant every time, does that mean that I have introverted sensing? Or if I plan, does that mean that I use introverted intuition? And the thing is, behavior and cognitive functions are not the same thing. They are related to each other, but they represent different processes. They represent completely different, let's say, mental spaces. So all about that in the next few minutes. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And before I get into the meat of this video, I would like to remind you that I also offer coaching sessions, not necessarily simply about MBTI or Enneagram, but more general personal development focused sessions. I have a background in psychology, coaching, and psychodrama, so I can help you with things such as life coaching, career coaching, general development of communication skills, conflict management skills, relationships, and of course, also integrating tools such as the MBTI and the Enneagram. So if any of these are of interest to you, you can check out the link in the description below. It will redirect you to my website and you can book your first free discovery call there. Anyway, let's get back to business. Cognitive functions and behavior. So I just made a post today on my Instagram, so feel free to check that out. The way I imagine this is basically that there is a spiral, okay? In the center of the spiral, we have the cognitive functions, the abstract mental processes that people use: introverted intuition, introverted feeling, extroverted sensing, introverted thinking, extroverted thinking, and so on, okay? The 8 cognitive functions. These processes occur in an abstract way. They are linked to the way our brain works. And there are certain correlations between the usage of this function and the brain activity. Okay, so just how Dario Nardi was pointing out in his book, The Neuroscience of Personality, we see that when someone is supposedly using a certain function, a certain pattern in the brain occurs. Certain parts of the neocortex interact with each other in such a way that that type of function is mobilized. But remember that cognitive functions do not exist per se. They are not concrete. They are abstract. They are metaphors, ideas that we associate with something that happens in the brain and something that we can then observe in someone's thinking process. Carl Jung was describing these processes in his book Psychological Types. And he was talking about how he basically noticed these patterns in the people, in his patients, in whatever person that he interacted with. But the patterns themselves are not something that you can touch. They're not tangible. They are processes that are separate from all of that activity, processes that are a combination of different types of mental and emotional energies, okay? So even though they can and are linked to behavior, they are not the same thing. And sometimes if we only look at behavior, we risk understanding something different, or we risk mistyping someone, because even though behavior can give us a hint, it can give us certain clues about someone's type, that's not the whole story. So getting back to the spiral that I was mentioning earlier, we have the cognitive functions in the middle of the spiral. And then once the spiral finishes, we have behavior, the output. But in between, on all of those lines that create the spiral, we have a multitude of factors. The ones that I could come up with are things such as values, okay? People have different values, regardless of what cognitive functions they prefer, they have values, okay? And those values shape the types of decisions that people make, the types of behaviors that they choose to implement, because they want to be aligned with those values that they care about. Some people value money more than others. Some people value friendship more than others. Some people value family more than others, and so on and so forth. So even if two people both use introverted intuition, for instance, they might not behave the same in a context because their values might be different. And those values might change the way that those cognitive functions lead to the behavior. Similarly, we have things such as beliefs and previous experiences that shape the way that we think. The cognitive functions per se do not change as a result of beliefs or experiences, but the types of decisions that we make and the behaviors that we have are influenced to a pretty large extent by our beliefs. Some might call them limiting beliefs because all beliefs are limiting in nature. And experience is basically everything that we do every single day, every person that we interact with, everything that we do and don't do, everything that we hear and see, and so on and so forth. And of course, all of these factors change and shape the way that we think, the decisions that we make, the things that we like and we don't like, the things that we choose in a certain context. Okay, then we might have something like intrapsychic events or extrapsychic events. By these, I mean other mental processes that are not cognitive functions. Because cognitive functions are 8, we have 8 cognitive functions, and they are not isolated. They are not things that are unrelated to other processes that happen in the mind. So there's a lot of other things that happen, processes like imagination and memory. And yes, they can be connected to a certain extent, like imagination can be related to introverted intuition and extroverted intuition for that matter, but there's more to imagination than that. Memory can be related to introverted sensing to a certain extent, but there's much more to memory than that. And of course, there's a lot of other mental processes, and they come into play, work with the cognitive functions and with all of the other factors, and then get to behavior. We have certain environmental factors or extrapsychic events, things that happen around us in the moment while we're processing and using those cognitive functions. And they also influence what happens and how those functions eventually transform into the output, into the behavior, okay? So it's very important to try to understand how someone thinks, okay? What is their mental process? What is the abstraction of the mind? I get asked again and again, can you give me a practical example of the difference between these two functions? And my answer is no, I can't really, because they're not really about practical examples. They're more about these mental processes that people engage in, and the practical examples will be limiting. The practical examples will make you believe that a function is solely about a certain behavior or a certain group of behaviors, and it's not. And you might think that if someone has a good memory, this means that they are an SI user, and it's not necessarily the case. Or you might say that if someone is good at planning, they are for sure an NI type. And no, SI and TE can both have something to do with planning, but in a different way and for different reasons. So getting back to Jung and getting back to his masterpiece, Psychological Types, I really recommend you to watch my series of 8 videos where I talk about the cognitive functions as described by Jung originally in his work in Psychological Types. Because starting from there, we can have a much better understanding of the functions and how these functions eventually lead to behavior. Yes, again, behavior is related to cognitive functions in a way. There is a certain impact that cognitive functions have on behavior, but it's not the whole story. And things such as values, beliefs, experiences, other psychological events, environmental factors, and so on and so forth also have a really, really important major role into the types of behaviors that we use. Not to mention culture for that matter, or religion. They are also very important. So yeah, these are my thoughts on cognitive functions and behavior and the relationship between the two. Feel free to add anything else that you came up with, anything else that you understand about this relationship, and add it in the comment section below. And as always, thanks a lot for watching this video. Thanks a lot for being with me, and see you next time with another video on typology.